The air above colonial Philadelphia in the mid-18th century was a mingling of contradictions. The sharp scent of pine resin from shipyards along the Delaware River, the lingering aroma of coal smoke from iron foundries, the earthy odor of horses and damp cobblestone streets, and overlaying all of it, the almost electric tension of an age on the cusp of scientific awakening. The 1700s were a time when reason challenged long-held beliefs, when the natural world began to yield its secrets, not through superstition, but through experiment, observation, and daring curiosity. And in no place in the American colonies was that spirit stronger than in the bustling home of a man whose mind was constantly aflame with questions, Benjamin Franklin. The story of the lightning rod does not begin with a stroke of genius, nor with a single flash of insight. It begins instead with a puzzle, a deadly, mysterious, ancient puzzle that humanity had never solved. For thousands of years, lightning had been a force of terror, an omen of God's wrath, a natural destroyer beyond understanding. The crack of a thunderbolt had toppled trees, obliterated barns, shattered church steeples, and burned entire villages to the ground. People prayed against it, feared it, mythologized it, but they did not comprehend it. Even in the Age of Enlightenment, lightning remained a frontier of ignorance. Franklin, however, was not content with ignorance and the world he lived in. Philadelphia of the 1740s was a place uniquely suited to foster his curiosity. He lived in a townhouse on Market Street, above the printing shop that had become one of the most successful in the colonies. The shop smelled perpetually of ink, hot-type metal, and drying paper. In the evenings, after apprentices went home and the press was silent, Franklin would climb to the second floor, where his study overlooked the busy street below. There he kept his books on natural philosophy, his letters from London intellectuals, his glass tubes and Leyden jars, and an ever-growing collection of electrical apparatuses. Electricity was still a novelty then, an amusement for private societies and fashionable salons in Europe. Scholars knew they could generate electrical charge through friction. They knew that sparks could leap from metal surfaces. They knew strange effects like the ability to make small objects move or hairs stand upright. But these displays were curiosities more than scientific principles. Electricity was something seen and felt, but not understood. It was a tame indoor cousin of lightning, a novelty that seemed perhaps like a distant relative of the terrifying phenomenon in the sky. Franklin suspected the relationship was far closer than others believed. The beginnings of his fascination can be traced to a series of letters he exchanged with the Royal Society in London in the early 1740s. These letters, full of polite civility but bold curiosity, contained his earliest musings on electrical charge. Franklin noticed that electricity behaved not in two substances, as many believed, but as one substance that could exist in excess or deficiency. He coined the terms positive and negative charge, giving language to a concept that would shape the next centuries of scientific thought. He built a simple battery of Leyden jars glass containers coated with metal that could store static electricity. He shocked himself countless times, laughed at the sensations, and wrote in his diary about experiments gone awry. His wife, Deborah, had grown accustomed to odd popping sounds in the house and occasional blue sparks illuminating his study late at night. But it was in 1749 that Franklin first articulated an idea that would alter the relationship between mankind and nature, the proposal that lightning was electrical. It was a thesis at once profoundly simple and incredibly bold. In a paper he wrote that year, he laid out observations, the similarity between the bright sparks produced by friction machines and the flashes in the sky, the crackling sound of small electric discharges and the thunderous roar of lightning, the way both electricity and lightning traveled along conductors, the branching pattern of sparks and the branching of lightning bolts. Lightning, he argued, is but a greater electric. This claim was radical. Lightning had long belonged to religion, mythology, and fear. To equate it with the small, playful sparks of laboratory electricity was to challenge not just common belief, but centuries of cultural tradition. Yet Franklin was undeterred. If lightning was electrical, he reasoned, then it behaved according to laws, not the whims of gods. And if it obeyed laws, then perhaps it could be understood, controlled, even redirected. Still, this was speculation. To prove it, Franklin needed an experiment, something that would pull electricity from the clouds themselves. The steeple experiment. Before Franklin envisioned flying a kite into a storm, he imagined a far riskier design, installing a long iron rod atop the unfinished spire of Christ Church in Philadelphia. That church, with its soaring white walls and elegant brick facade, stood as one of the most prominent buildings in the colonies. Construction on its tall steeple had been paused due to funding shortages, leaving a skeletal wooden frame exposed to the sky. Franklin saw an opportunity. He proposed mounting a 30-foot iron rod on the top of the structure, extending far into the open air, insulated from the building yet accessible from below for experimentation. If lightning was truly electrical, the rod might gather charge from storm clouds overhead, creating sparks at its lower end that could be observed indoors. The plan was ambitious and dangerous. Franklin was well aware of the risks. At that time, construction of church steeples was already hazardous work. Carpenters balanced on narrow beams 3 or 4 stories above the street. To ask them to install a long, lightning-attracting iron rod was to invite the wrath of a force still poorly understood. Some church leaders were hesitant. Others were intrigued. But ultimately, financial delays prevented the steeple from being completed for several years. Franklin's steeple experiment never got built. The world of science unknowingly had been spared a catastrophe. A direct lightning strike on an unprotected building could have killed workers or destroyed the unfinished tower. This delay, frustrating though it was, pushed Franklin toward a new idea, one that would require no church, no construction crew, and no cooperation from anyone other than the sky itself. The kite idea. Franklin often worked alone late into the night, pacing the wooden floorboards of his study. It is said that the idea for the kite experiment came to him not in a burst of inspiration, but in a quiet moment of contemplation. If a tall steeple could draw electricity from the clouds, then surely an artificial extension into the sky, a kite, could serve the same purpose. The idea was ingenious, simple, and extremely hazardous. By the early 1750s, Franklin had already written descriptions of the experiment he intended to attempt. He imagined a silk kite. Silk because rain would not cause it to tear. a long hemp string soaked by the storm's moisture, and a metal key attached to the lower end of the string. The key would collect electrical charge, and a second dry silk ribbon, held between Franklin's hand and the key, would insulate him from shock. Electricity from the clouds would travel down the wet string, accumulate on the key, and from there could jump as a spark to his knuckle, or to a Leyden jar he intended to charge using the storm's power. This was the moment he hoped for. Visible, observable, lightning-born electricity. But it was also the moment that could kill him. At the time, nobody fully understood the difference between gathering charge from the ambient electrical state of storm clouds and attracting a direct lightning strike. The former was relatively harmless, the latter was lethal. In later years, scientists would perform nearly identical experiments, and several would die for it. Franklin himself was lucky, and he may never have realized just how close he came to catastrophe. Preparing for the storm. The year 1752 was marked by unusually warm springs across the colonies, followed by sudden violent thunderstorms. Franklin had been waiting for weather like this: dark clouds heavy with potential charge, a sky rumbling with energy. Around midday on a June afternoon, a dark bank of storm clouds began gathering to the west of Philadelphia, rolling over the countryside like an approaching tide. Franklin went to the backyard of a small house he owned on the outskirts of town. With him was his 21-year-old son, William Franklin, who watched with a mixture of excitement and anxiety as his father assembled the apparatus. The kite frame was made of 2 slender cedar strips crossed and tied with twine. Over this frame, Franklin stretched a square of silk fabric he had borrowed from Deborah. She was not entirely pleased when she later learned its purpose. A long hemp string was tied to the bottom of the frame, and near the lower end, Franklin fastened a metal key. Finally, several feet above the key, he attached a length of silk ribbon to serve as insulation. Rain began to fall. The wind picked up. William looked at the sky and felt his stomach tighten. "Father," he said, "are you certain this is wise?" Franklin gave a small, reassuring smile. "All discoveries require some measure of hazard, my boy." William said nothing, but his eyes betrayed worry. Reports were not uncommon of barns struck by lightning, of farmers killed in open fields. To stand outside flying a metal-bearing kite into a storm seemed to tempt fate. Franklin, however, remained calm. He had thought through each step countless times. They walked into an open field. Raindrops tapped against the silk kite, making it sparkle under the flickering grey light. The sky crackled faintly with distant thunder. Franklin released the kite, and the wind caught it immediately, pulling it upward. The hemp string grew taut as the kite climbed higher and higher. The clouds churned overhead, dark, layered masses swirling with unseen forces. Franklin stood beneath a small improvised shelter to keep the lower portion of the apparatus dry. William helped anchor the string so it would not slip away. The experiment had begun. Minutes passed. The storm deepened. Franklin held the dry silk ribbon in one hand, preventing the charge from flowing directly through him. With the other hand, he reached toward the metal key. At first, nothing happened. He waited. A gust of wind tilted the kite sharply, and for a moment Franklin worried the string would snap. But the materials held. The sky rumbled above them. Then he saw it. A single thin filament of frayed hemp on the string began to stand upright. Just one thread, quivering toward the key. Then another, and another. Franklin's heart pounded. This was electricity. The string was becoming electrified by the storm clouds. The individual fibers repelled one another. Separating in the same way, electrified threads behaved in laboratory experiments. Franklin extended a knuckle toward the key. A spark leapt, small, blue, unmistakable. He felt its shock. A sensation not of pain, but of triumphant confirmation. "William," he whispered, unable to keep the excitement from his voice, "we have done it." Lightning, once a terrifying mystery, had yielded its secret. They had drawn electricity from the heavens. Franklin quickly brought a Leyden jar close to the key, capturing the charge within its glass container. The jar crackled softly as electricity filled it. The storm continued to rage overhead, but Franklin remained focused, methodically performing measurements, observing the behavior of sparks, confirming his theory with every passing minute. Eventually, when the storm became too fierce and the danger too great, Franklin signaled for the kite to be brought down. Father and son worked together, carefully handling the wet string, mindful of residual charge. When the kite finally landed, Franklin exhaled a long breath he had not realized he'd been holding. He had survived. More importantly, his hypothesis had survived. The aftermath of the experiment. Word of Franklin's experiment spread slowly at first. Communications across the Atlantic took months, even under favorable winds. But by late 1752, European scientific circles were buzzing with rumors that a man in the American colonies had managed to draw electricity from the sky. Skeptics abounded. Some doubted the feasibility of such an experiment without catastrophic results. Others questioned Franklin's methodology, but the idea had taken root. Over the next several years, scientists in England, France, and Germany repeated the principles of Franklin's experiment, some with carefully controlled apparatuses, others with far riskier designs. Tragedies occurred. Several researchers were killed when their devices attracted direct strikes. Yet despite the risks, the underlying truth was undeniable. Lightning and electricity were one. Franklin's place in scientific history was secured. But he was not content merely to understand lightning. He wanted to protect people from it. The first lightning rod. Franklin reasoned that if lightning was electrical, and if electrical charge was attracted to sharp metal points, as his laboratory experiments demonstrated, then a metal rod could draw lightning safely away from buildings. By providing a direct path into the ground, the rod would prevent lightning from striking wooden structures and starting deadly fires. It was a concept elegant in logic, yet revolutionary in implication. Early tests showed promise. Franklin installed rods on his own home and on public buildings. Some skeptics mocked them, calling them Franklin's iron needles. Others feared they interfered with divine will. Yet the rods proved effective, time and time again. Structures protected by them survived storms that destroyed nearby unprotected buildings. The lightning rod became one of the most transformative inventions of the century, not because it harnessed nature, but because it defended against it. Franklin, ever modest, never sought a patent for it. He believed in the free sharing of knowledge, but his invention would soon spark debates far beyond science debates of philosophy, religion, and national identity. A world ignited. If Franklin had hoped that the lightning rod would be accepted immediately as a triumph of reason, he underestimated how deeply lightning was woven into the spiritual imagination of the 18th century. In the American colonies, many embraced the new device with gratitude and relief. But across the Atlantic, the reception was far more turbulent. No sooner had Franklin's experiments reached Europe than religious leaders, aristocrats, philosophers, kings, and scientists began debating not just the validity of his findings, but the morality of altering the relationship between mankind and the heavens. News of the Philadelphia experiment spread first in private correspondence letters, exchanged by scientists who belonged to the same informal but tightly knit community of Enlightenment thinkers. One of these was the French natural philosopher Thomas-François Dalibard, a man of meticulous habits and bold curiosity. Dalibard had translated Franklin's experiments and observations on electricity into French and had come to admire the clarity of Franklin's thought. Yet even he was unprepared for what the next months would bring. The French verification. On May 10th, 1752, while Franklin waited in Philadelphia for the right storm to conduct his now famous kite experiment, Dalibard performed what Franklin had hoped to accomplish with his church steeple experiment. In the village of Marly-le-Ville near Paris, Dalibard erected a 40-foot iron rod insulated from the ground and connected to a conductor that entered a small wooden hut. When a thunderstorm passed overhead, sparks leapt from the conductor inside the hut. Dalibard and his colleagues watched in awe as the metal rod drew electricity directly from the cloud. The experiment was a triumph. Dalibard sent word to the French Academy of Sciences, which confirmed the findings publicly. Europe erupted in fascination. Strangely, Franklin did not learn of these results until months later. By the time he received the letters, he had already flown his kite in Philadelphia. 2 separate experiments across an ocean had validated the same theory almost simultaneously. Lightning was electrical. The implications were enormous. For the first time in history, humanity had peeled back the veil over one of nature's most awe-inspiring forces. But celebrations were mixed with anxiety. If lightning was electrical, then it followed physical laws. And if it followed physical laws, then the heavens were not governed entirely by divine whim. To Enlightenment thinkers, this was thrilling. To others, it was frightening, bordering on heresy. Opposition from the Church. The Catholic Church had long believed lightning to be an instrument of divine judgment. Church bells were designed not only to call worshippers, but also, according to medieval belief, to disperse storm demons. Bell towers had been struck countless times. Many bell ringers died during storms, their bodies hurled from the towers or killed by electrical shock conducted through the metal bells they rang. The irony was cruel. Those who believed they were protecting their communities were instead risking their lives. Franklin's invention struck at the heart of this religious tradition. If lightning could be redirected or neutralized by a metal rod, what did this say about divine intervention? Could a simple device of iron and copper protect a sinner's house as effectively as a church? Across Europe, theologians argued bitterly. Some saw the lightning rod as a rebellion against God. One Bavarian cleric claimed, "To defy lightning is to defy the Almighty." Others accused Franklin of meddling in forces beyond human authority. In parts of Austria and southern Germany, religious authorities even forbade the installation of lightning rods, insisting that bells continue to be rung during storms. This ban had deadly consequences. Records from the period show that between 1753 and 1786, at least 121 bell ringers in Germany were killed by lightning, many of them in churches that had refused to adopt rods. These tragedies gradually shifted public perception. People began to question why ringing bells was considered holier than using a device proven by science to work. In time, even the most conservative regions grudgingly accepted the lightning rod not because the theological argument had been won, but because the cost of refusing it was too visible to ignore. The rise of the conductor. While Franklin avoided taking credit for the invention, insisting it belonged to natural philosophy rather than personal genius scientists across Europe, embraced lightning rods with enthusiasm. In England, the physician and natural philosopher John Canton built his own devices and performed controlled experiments to confirm Franklin's theories. He became one of Franklin's strongest advocates in London, defending the coloniesman's discoveries against skeptics. In Italy, the polymath Giambattista Beccaria expanded Franklin's ideas into a broader theory of atmospheric electricity. But it was Switzerland that introduced one of the greatest controversies in the history of lightning protection. The blunt tip debate. Franklin's lightning rod design called for a sharp metal point. He believed sharp tips more effectively dissipated electrical charge, reducing the chance of a violent strike. This view was not merely theoretical. It was based on careful observation of electric sparks in laboratory conditions. But the Swiss mathematician Johann Carl Wilcke, and later the celebrated Swiss physicist Georg Christoph Lichtenberg, argued that blunt-tipped rods attracted lightning more reliably, offering better protection for tall buildings. The debate grew intense. Sharp rods would bleed off electrical charge, reducing strikes. Blunt rods would invite strikes, safely directing them into the ground. Both methods worked, but differently. The scientific community fractured over the issue. Even King George III became involved, pressuring British institutions to adopt blunt rods after the king's preferred physicists endorsed them. This dispute reached almost absurd levels. A committee of the Royal Society found itself debating the geometric properties of points versus hemispheres, while newspapers mocked the conflict as the War of the Needles. Franklin responded calmly, with characteristic wit. "The pointed rod," he wrote, "is as much preferable to the blunt one as a needle is preferable to a poker." Though modern science ultimately validated his preference for pointed rods, the debate illustrated something profound. The lightning rod was not just a device. It was a symbol of the enlightenment of the belief that nature could be understood and made safe through reason. The first official installations. By 1753, lightning rods were being installed on buildings throughout Philadelphia. Franklin placed one on his own house. The Pennsylvania State House, later known as Independence Hall, was outfitted with a rod. So were many private homes, farms, courthouses, and taverns. Colonists, practical by nature, saw the value of the invention almost immediately. One of the earliest documented protections occurred at a house on Race Street. A powerful storm had blown in from the river, and lightning struck the rod with such force that it blackened its tip. The building, however, remained unharmed. A neighbor later wrote, "Had it not been for Dr. Franklin's invention, the whole block might have been consumed." Soon after, lightning rods became a symbol of civic safety. Insurance companies began offering lower rates for buildings equipped with them, further encouraging adoption. In Europe, the reaction was slower, but just as ultimately widespread. Paris was among the first major cities to accept lightning rods, thanks to the influence of Dalibard and the Marquis de Courtanvaux. In 1760, a rod was installed on the Royal Powder Magazine at Grenelle, an explosive storage facility that had long terrified city officials. When a storm later passed through and the building emerged unscathed, the public's trust grew. Lightning rods were now firmly part of the architectural landscape of Europe and America. But the story was far from over. Franklin's international fame. Franklin never sought personal glory for his invention, yet his reputation soared. The Royal Society awarded him the Copley Medal in 1753, the highest scientific honor of the time. He became a member of academies from Paris to St. Petersburg. His writings were circulated in multiple languages. He was praised in poems, celebrated in salons, and discussed in coffee houses. For people living in wooden towns prone to fires, the lightning rod was not merely impressive, it was life-saving. But fame brought complications. When Franklin traveled to England in 1757 as a political representative of the Pennsylvania Assembly, he found himself caught in a whirlwind of scientific politics. Some British scientists resented the acclaim granted to a colonial printer with no formal education. Others embraced him warmly. Franklin's calm dignity, plain dress, and deep intellect won the respect of many, including members of the aristocracy. But the blunt-tip debate, fueled by royal favor, created tension. Franklin handled it gracefully, refusing to turn scientific disagreement into personal rivalry. In private letters, however, he expressed frustration. "The king's philosophers are as zealous as the church's priests," he wrote to a friend, "and no less infallible in their own estimation." Despite the controversies, Franklin's position as one of the foremost natural philosophers of the century was secure. Yet while Europe argued, lightning continued to strike, and the need for better understanding only grew. Lightning in the Age of Revolution. Franklin returned to America a decade later in 1762, just as the political atmosphere between the colonies and Britain was beginning to sour. He found Philadelphia changed, growing, bustling, and now adorned with dozens of lightning rods. But new challenges emerged. Some colonial towns opposed lightning rods on theological grounds. Others welcomed them, but installed them incorrectly, leading to failures. Franklin realized that the success of his invention depended not only on science, but on education. He began writing clear instructions on proper installation. The rod needed to be tall, ideally higher than any nearby feature. Its metal must be continuous, with no breaks. It had to run into the earth where moisture could conduct away charge. Copper was ideal, but iron sufficed. One of Franklin's most influential recommendations was that rods should be installed on ships. Naval vessels were particularly vulnerable. Masts were lightning's preferred target. European navies began experimenting with protective devices. The British Navy, after much resistance, finally adopted lightning rods in 1778, though not without heated argument. Here, too, Franklin faced opposition from conservative officers who believed lightning was a divine judgment that should not be interfered with. But the practical men, the sailors who had seen ships split or burned, were grateful. The rods saved lives. The Great Storm of 1765. One of the most dramatic early testimonials to the lightning rod's effectiveness came during an immense storm that swept across the colonies in 1765. In the town of Newburyport, Massachusetts, the Reverend Dr. Jonathan Parsons had insisted on installing lightning rods on his meeting house, a decision that outraged some parishioners who believed it sacrilegious. But on a July afternoon, when a thunderstorm arrived with violent fury, lightning struck Parsons's church tower. Witnesses reported a blinding white flash. The rod glowed for an instant. A crackling roar shook the building, and then silence. The lightning had followed Franklin's designed path, from the tip of the rod down the conductor and into the earth. Not a single shingle was burned. The congregation gathered outside, stunned and speechless. Across the street, another building, one without a rod, had been struck directly and had burst into flames. After that night, the opposition in Newburyport vanished. The meeting house became a symbol of the triumph of reason over fear. Scientific frontiers. Franklin's original lightning rod was simple: a metal point, a conductor, and a grounding system. But as Enlightenment science progressed, so did the theoretical understanding behind the device. Researchers in France, Germany, and Italy began exploring atmospheric electricity more deeply. They developed improved electrometers, better grounding methods, and more accurate theories of cloud charge. By the 1770s, Franklin's work had laid the foundation for electrostatic theory, charge distribution models, potential gradient measurements, early weather science. The lightning rod, once seen as a curiosity, was now recognized as a gateway to an entire field, the study of atmospheric electricity. And yet, for Franklin, the lightning rod was only one chapter in a much larger story. His life as a statesman, inventor, diplomat, writer, and philosopher. But the invention that had first carried his name across the Atlantic would remain one of the greatest legacies of the Enlightenment. The limits of knowledge. Despite the rapid adoption of lightning rods, many questions remained unanswered. Why did some storms generate more charge than others? Why did lightning sometimes strike upward, from ground to cloud? Could thunderstorms be predicted? What caused the violent forked patterns of lightning bolts? Scientists developed better instruments, electrometers that could measure atmospheric charge before storms, specialized rods for collecting data rather than protecting buildings, and even early versions of lightning detectors. Franklin participated in this work whenever he could. Even as political tensions escalated and his responsibilities grew, he continued studying electricity in his spare moments. In 1772, at age 66, he wrote to a friend, "I find myself still thrilling at the spark of a Leyden jar, as I did in youth. The curiosity of the natural world never loses its savor." But the most significant advances in lightning protection came not from laboratories, but from hard-earned experience. As more rods were installed, engineers and electricians, a new term then, learned the importance of rod height, sharpness of the point, adequate grounding depth, protection of chimneys and clock towers, redundancy systems. It was a period of trial, error, and gradual refinement. Franklin and the Revolution. As the 1770s progressed, Franklin increasingly found himself at the center of political storms. He became a leading advocate for colonial rights, eventually sailing back to Europe to serve as America's representative in France during the Revolutionary War. There, he experienced a second wave of acclaim as both a scientist and diplomat. French aristocrats hosted salons in his honor. Ladies wore hairstyles shaped like lightning rod's coiffure à la Franklin as a tribute to his discoveries. But recognition came with responsibility. Franklin used his scientific reputation to cultivate alliances and strengthen diplomatic ties, helping to secure French support for American independence. Yet even while navigating the complex politics of war, Franklin continued to refine and promote lightning rods. He encouraged their use on ships carrying gunpowder, arguing their importance in safeguarding ammunition stores. His reasoning was simple and irrefutable. Lightning, like tyranny, should be resisted. A symbol of the Enlightenment. By the late 18th century, lightning rods had become more than safety devices. They were symbols of rationality, representing the Enlightenment belief that nature could be understood, reason could conquer fear, knowledge could protect human life. In a world still plagued by superstition, the lightning rod was a physical manifestation of intellectual progress. Churches that once condemned rods now installed them. Governments mandated them on public buildings. Naval fleets equipped their ships with them. Architects designed structures with rods built into their cores. Franklin, modest as always, received letters from across the world thanking him for the invention. One French nobleman wrote, "You have snatched the fire of heaven not to wield it, but to disarm it." Others described rods that saved their homes, farms, and families. These letters, Franklin later said, were among the few pieces of correspondence he cherished most. The final years. When Franklin returned to America for the last time in 1785, he was nearly 80 years old. His hair was white, his gait slow, but his mind remained lively. Philadelphia greeted him as a hero. He spent his final years involved in politics, science, and writing. He chaired a committee on education, helped establish civic institutions, and continued advising people on lightning rod installation. Even in old age, Franklin would stop his carriage if he saw a poorly installed rod. On at least 2 occasions, he personally corrected grounding wires in the yards of strangers, explaining that improperly installed rods were worse than useless. When he died in 1790, lightning rods adorned thousands of buildings across the Western world. His invention had altered the fabric of society. But the story of the lightning rod didn't end with Franklin's death. In the 19th century, a new generation of scientists would build upon his discoveries. Men like Michael Faraday, James Clerk Maxwell, and Heinrich Hertz. Yet, for all their genius, they would acknowledge Franklin as one of the first to understand the true nature of electricity. His lightning rod was not merely an invention. It was the beginning of a revolution. The Rod and the Revolution. By the time Franklin returned from England in the early 1760s, the colonies stood on the edge of transformation. The lightning rod, though already spreading through American towns, had come to symbolize something more profound than protection from storms. It represented human agency, the power of knowledge over fear. That symbolic energy blended naturally with the rising sentiment of independence that pulsed through the streets of Boston, Philadelphia, and Charleston. Franklin himself did not view his invention as political, but colonists increasingly did. The idea that men could disarm the heavens, as one Boston newspaper wrote, resonated with a people beginning to question the authority of a distant monarchy. Lightning rods were installed on assembly houses, taverns, presses, and universities across the colonies, places where radical discussions brewed. A New England pamphlet proclaimed, "If we can guard our homes from the wrath of the clouds, we may guard our liberties from the wrath of tyrants." It was hyperbole, yes, but hyperbole rooted in awe. The lightning rod was one of the most visible symbols of scientific progress. In a world where storms destroyed entire districts, the device offered something almost revolutionary: predictable safety. The science spread south. As the Enlightenment ideas traveled south into Virginia and the Carolinas, so too did the lightning rod. Plantation owners, often fearful of losing tobacco barns or storehouses to fires, began installing rods after dramatic demonstrations. One especially influential event occurred on a plantation near Williamsburg, where a barn filled with cured tobacco 1 year's worth of a family's income was saved by its rod during a violent storm in 1764. Observers described that the lightning cracked upon the rod like a musket, but the building stood unharmed. A crowd gathered the next morning to examine the ground near the rod's buried end. The earth had been churned violently, as if plowed by a sudden force. The story spread rapidly. By the end of the decade, lightning rods began appearing atop plantations, court buildings, and taverns across Virginia. Even Thomas Jefferson, fascinated by the sciences, wrote to Franklin asking advice on proper installation for Monticello. Jefferson admired the lightning rod not simply as a device, but as evidence of a principle he believed in deeply, that natural laws were discoverable, rational, and universal. In his letters, he referred to Franklin's invention as one of the greatest boons ever bestowed by human reason upon human habitation. Storm over Boston. In Boston, where dense wooden houses sat only inches apart, lightning rods saved entire districts from catastrophic fires. One incident in 1770 became the talk of the town. Lightning struck the steeple of the Old South Meeting House, the same building where, 3 years later, colonists would gather to protest the Tea Act. The lightning rod installed there just months before conducted the strike harmlessly into the ground. Crowds gathered to examine the rod the next morning. Some knelt to touch the charred tip with reverence, as though it were a relic. A local minister recorded in his journal that it was as though Dr. Franklin had placed a shield betwixt the wrath of heaven and the city of Boston. Lightning rods became so ubiquitous in Boston that foreign travelers commented on them. A British captain visiting the city in 1772 wrote, "There are more iron points upon the roofs of Boston than stars upon her flag." He meant it derisively. Boston took it as praise. An invention under fire. Even as the colonies embraced lightning rods, resistance persisted in certain circles, particularly among clergy in rural areas who mistrusted scientific novelties. Ministers preached sermons declaring that Franklin's invention interfered with divine punishment. One fiery orator in Connecticut claimed, "If the Lord sends fire from heaven, who are we to divert it? Shall man rise above God with his little metal rod?" To which a farmer in attendance reportedly replied, "If the Lord sends the rain, must we not still build a roof?" This pragmatic spirit ultimately triumphed, but pockets of resistance remained well into the Revolution. Some churches refused to install rods as an act of faith. Several of them later regretted that decision after catastrophic strikes. Franklin in France. When Franklin left America again in late 1776, bound for France as an ambassador for the fledgling United States, he carried with him not only diplomatic hopes, but scientific prestige. In France, Franklin was already a legend. His lightning rod had been embraced by philosophers, nobles, scientists, and even fashion icons. Parisian aristocrats held electrical soirees, where members of high society amused themselves with Leyden jars, electrostatic machines, and experiments inspired directly by Franklin's writings. His portrait hung in the salons of Voltaire and Condorcet. Ladies wore elaborate hairstyles, featuring small silver wires resembling lightning rods, an eccentric but affectionate tribute to the American inventor. Yet Franklin's influence was not purely symbolic. His presence gave legitimacy to American appeals for military and financial aid. French ministers, impressed by his intellectual reputation, treated him with an unusual degree of respect for a colonial envoy. It was in a Parisian drawing room, not in a laboratory or a political assembly, that Franklin overheard a marquise declare, "Any nation capable of producing the lightning rod is capable of producing liberty." It was flattery, to be sure, but it reflected a genuine belief among Enlightenment thinkers that the same reasoning that tamed lightning could challenge tyranny. The rod at war. During the American Revolutionary War, lightning rods played an unexpected role. Gunpowder magazines were essential targets for both armies. An accidental strike could destroy ammunition stockpiles, injure soldiers, or turn the tide of a battle. Franklin, aware of the danger, wrote urgent letters imploring Continental Army officers to install rods on all powder stores. He warned, "Lightning knows no allegiance." At several forts, his advice was heeded and proved life-saving. One dramatic example occurred at Fort Ticonderoga in 1777. A violent storm struck during preparations for the British advance. Lightning hit the fort's powder magazine, but the rod installed earlier that year diverted the strike safely into the ground. Soldiers witnessed the flash and expected the worst. When the smoke cleared, they realized the magazine had been spared. That moment was later described by an officer as Franklin's victory against the heavens. British forces, too, began begrudgingly installing rods after suffering devastating losses. On one occasion, a lightning strike destroyed stores of gunpowder at a British depot in New York, killing several men. After that, commanders petitioned London for permission to use the American device, even though King George III still favored blunt-tip rods, championed by his preferred scientists. Practical necessity overrode politics. Faraday's forebear. Though Franklin could not foresee it, the principles demonstrated by the lightning rod would later support breakthroughs by future pioneers, Michael Faraday, André-Marie Ampère, and James Clerk Maxwell. The simple idea that charge could be conducted, directed, and controlled laid the groundwork for electromagnetism. Faraday would later write, in a tribute to Franklin, "He took the lightning from the heavens, and with it lit the torch that guides all scientific discovery." Franklin's lightning rod was not merely a safeguard, it was a doorway into modern electrical science. The unknown dangers. Despite its success, the lightning rod posed challenges and mysteries. During the late 18th century, researchers examining damaged rods discovered curious Marx fusion pits, magnetic residues, and metallic globules. Nobody could yet explain why some rods glowed during strikes, or why the ground sometimes vibrated violently at the grounding site. These observations hinted at phenomena beyond contemporary understanding: plasma formation, magnetic induction, shockwave propagation. Franklin recognized the limitations of existing knowledge, writing in one letter, "We are but infants in the study of electricity, playing with sparks while the universe roars beyond our grasp." He sensed there were deeper forces at play, perhaps connected to storm structure, atmospheric layers, or the nature of charge itself. But the tools to explore these mysteries would not exist until the 19th century. The Baltimore tragedy. Not all stories of lightning rods were triumphant. In 1783, a poorly installed rod in Baltimore caused a deadly incident. The rod had been placed on a warehouse, but the grounding wire had been left incomplete, buried only a few inches into dry soil. During a nighttime storm, lightning struck the rod. Deprived of a safe path to the earth, the electrical energy jumped to the building's interior beams. Sparks ignited dry hemp stored inside, causing an inferno that killed several laborers sleeping on the upper floors. Franklin, hearing of the tragedy, wrote a somber critique. The rod itself did not err. Rather, the hand that placed it failed in its duty. This incident underscored an essential truth. A lightning rod must be installed correctly, or it invites danger rather than averts it. Franklin's final lightning rod. Late in life, Franklin designed what he jokingly called "my last rod." It was installed atop the steeple of the new Pennsylvania Hospital building in Philadelphia, a structure dear to Franklin's heart, as he had helped found the hospital decades earlier. The rod rose higher than any in the city. Franklin inspected it personally several times, even in old age, leaning heavily on his cane as he examined the grounding system. In 1789, a year before his death, the rod endured a massive lightning strike. Witnesses reported the steeple burst into white flame for the span of a blink. But the building suffered no harm. Franklin smiled when he heard the story. "Good," he said. "Let it stand as proof to all who doubt." He died the following year, but that rod restored and maintained remains on the building to this day. A new world of metal and sky. By the turn of the 19th century, the American landscape had changed. Cities like Philadelphia, Boston, and New York rose more boldly against the horizon, their skylines punctured not by church steeples alone, but by the thin, gleaming silhouettes of lightning rods. Even small towns that once resisted the invention had adopted it out of sheer practicality. Farmhouses, mills, granaries, hospitals, courthouses, and colleges almost all had some form of Franklin's device. Travelers crossing the countryside would see iron glimmers atop distant barns, like sentinels standing guard over wooden structures. The rods became so common that they no longer inspired awe, but quiet gratitude. And yet, with widespread adoption, came a new era of challenges, technical, cultural, and philosophical, toward a deeper science. After Franklin's death in 1790, the field of atmospheric electricity entered a transitional phase. His theories remained influential, but younger scientists sought greater rigor. They wished not merely to protect buildings from lightning, but to fully understand the mechanisms that governed storms. One such figure was the English physicist John Dalton, who, though best known for atomic theory, showed early interest in atmospheric phenomena. Dalton meticulously recorded barometric pressure, humidity, cloud formations, and electrical disturbances. He aimed to correlate lightning with measurable patterns. Another was Alexander von Humboldt, the Prussian naturalist whose expeditions in the 1790s and early 1800s produced groundbreaking insights. Humboldt believed lightning was key to understanding global climate, and he carried portable electrometers on his journeys through South America. His diaries describe nights when he sat alone in tropical forests, watching distant storms erupt across the sky, and measuring the charge in the air, noting how the needle quivered wildly. Humboldt called lightning the Earth's arterial pulse, a poetic yet scientifically prescient notion. His work helped solidify what Franklin had intuited decades earlier, that lightning was not an isolated curiosity. It was part of a vast network of forces between land, sea, and atmosphere. Meanwhile, in Europe, the lightning rod was by now embedded in urban architecture, though not without lingering cultural tensions. German towns, having suffered grievously from bell ringers killed in storms, eventually abandoned the ancient practice. By 1803, several principalities issued decrees requiring lightning rods on churches, government buildings, and public halls. It was an ironic twist. The very same religious institutions that once opposed Franklin's invention now embraced it, sometimes enthusiastically. In France, Napoleon Bonaparte ordered lightning rods installed on military arsenals and fortresses. After a series of devastating lightning-induced explosions at gunpowder magazines in the late 1790s, the first consul consulted physicist Jean-Baptiste Biot, who recommended systematic protection. Napoleon reportedly remarked, "If Dr. Franklin had lived in Rome, the empire might still stand." Though apocryphal, the quote captured the aura of respect attributed to Franklin across Europe. The spread to Asia. Lightning rods reached Asia through European traders and colonial administrators. Portuguese and Dutch merchants introduced them to port cities such as Goa, Batavia, and Macau. British engineers installed rods on administrative buildings in Calcutta, Madras, and Hong Kong. These installations often followed calamity. In 1804, lightning struck a magazine in Madras, detonating hundreds of barrels of gunpowder and killing over 300 people. The disaster was widely reported, and within months British authorities ordered lightning rods for all East India Company magazines. Local populations observed the rods with curiosity. Some viewed them as foreign magic, others as protection from angry spirits. Over time, however, the rods integrated into the architecture of Indian and Chinese seaports, just as they had in Europe and America. The lightning rod had become global. The rod and the Navy. One of the greatest arenas of lightning rod evolution was the sea. Naval vessels, wooden giants with towering masts and stores of powder, were extremely vulnerable. Throughout the 18th century, dozens of warships and merchant vessels were lost to lightning-induced fires. Franklin himself, years earlier, had urged maritime adoption. But it was not until the early 1800s that systematic implementation began. The British Royal Navy initially resisted rods due to long-standing opposition from conservative officers. One admiral famously declared, "If the Almighty wishes to strike a ship, let him strike it." But resistance waned after several disastrous lightning incidents, including the destruction of HMS Boyne in 1795. A lightning strike ignited the ship's powder room. The vessel burned for hours before capsizing. After this tragedy, naval engineers redesigned ship lightning protection. Masts were fitted with copper spikes connected to copper cables running through the hull into the water. These maritime rods became a standard part of shipbuilding. By the War of 1812, American and British vessels alike were equipped with advanced lightning conductors. Sailors recounted how, during storms, lightning would crack against the rods, illuminating the rigging but leaving the vessel unharmed. An eerie yet reassuring sight. The rod as social divider. Despite its practical benefits, the lightning rod occasionally became a symbol of social division. In Europe, wealthier households installed elaborate rods made of polished copper, sometimes adorned with ornamental finials. These rods became status symbols, proof that a homeowner embraced modern science. Poorer towns, however, often lacked either the materials or the technical expertise for proper installation. In some places, blacksmiths improvised rods using cheap iron and inadequate grounding. Many of these makeshift devices worked. Some failed catastrophically. A few communities developed superstitions around the rods. In rural Wales, people believed that rods attracted evil spirits that rode down the metal during storms. In parts of Italy, villagers feared that rods would steal the lightning from the saints, diminishing divine protection. Such beliefs gradually faded, but they left traces in folklore well into the 20th century. The scientific critics. No scientific discovery escapes critique, and the lightning rod was no exception. In the early 1800s, several European physicists challenged aspects of Franklin's original design. Some claimed that rods did not protect nearby buildings equally, creating zones of vulnerability. Others questioned whether rods should be placed singly or in networks. A few insisted that rods increased the frequency of strikes by creating taller conductive targets. Debate also intensified over materials iron or copper, sharp or rounded, single rod or multiple, direct vertical grounding or angled grounding. This was not mere quibbling. Lives and property depended on correct methodology. In 1823, the German physicist Heinrich Wilhelm Brandes published extensive studies comparing rod designs. He concluded that copper offered the best conductivity. Multiple rods connected by thick conductors provided superior protection. Sharp tips did, in fact, facilitate charge dissipation. Brandes' work laid the foundation for modern standards. But even he acknowledged his debt to Franklin. We stand on the shoulders of the man who first brought heaven's fire under the rule of reason. The American frontier and the rod. As pioneers moved westward across the Appalachians, lightning rods traveled with them. The Midwest flat, open, prone to violent thunderstorms, proved fertile ground for rod adoption. Farmers learned quickly. A barn struck by lightning could destroy not only a year's harvest, but also livestock, tools, and the family home. Many frontier barns had rods even before they had proper glass windows. Letters from settlers describe hearing the metallic crack of lightning striking the rod while the family sheltered inside. Children grew up watching storm sparks dance along conductors, awe mixed with relief. One family in Ohio recorded in an 1834 journal, "We saw the rod take the bolt. The whole barn lit up blue, but no fire came. We thanked Dr. Franklin that night." Lightning rods became as essential to Midwest farms as wells or windmills. The rod in Africa and South America. European explorers and colonial administrators also brought lightning rods to Africa and South America. Missionaries built churches equipped with rods, often to the astonishment of locals who had long believed lightning to be the weapon of deities. In some regions, rods were accepted eagerly. In others, they were viewed with suspicion. But gradually, evidence overcame superstition. In South Africa, for instance, Dutch settlers found that lightning frequently struck the high veld. After a series of deadly strikes on homesteads, rods were installed widely. By the mid-1800s, the Cape Colony had some of the most rod-protected rural buildings in the world. In Brazil, Portuguese engineers fitted rods to sugar mills and plantation houses. A Brazilian scholar wrote in 1847, "Franklin's invention has made the tropics more inhabitable." The birth of lightning research. By the mid-19th century, lightning research matured into a true scientific discipline. New instruments allowed more precise measurement. Kite electrometers to measure atmospheric charge, balloon experiments to sample upper air, electrographs to track charge variation during storms. Researchers such as Francis Ronalds, Charles Wheatstone, and James Prescott Joule expanded on Franklin's legacy. The lightning rod was no longer a novelty. It was the cornerstone of atmospheric science. The meteorological revolution. Around this time, scientists began connecting lightning behavior to weather patterns, leading to the formation of early meteorological societies. Improved understanding of thunderstorms indirectly came from the widespread distribution of lightning rods. Thousands of installations acted as accidental sensors. Observers recorded how frequently rods were struck, in what direction strikes traveled, how storms moved geographically. This data, though primitive by modern standards, helped establish the first theories of storm tracking. Franklin's invention had done more than protect buildings. It sparked a global exchange of atmospheric data that would eventually develop into modern meteorology. Storms of myth and memory. Despite the scientific advancements, the lightning rod retained a mythic aura in the public imagination. Stories circulated of rods glowing before storms, humming with unseen energy, or repelling bolts that curved in midair. Some tales were exaggerations. Some were rooted in real phenomena like corona discharge. But one fact remained unchanged. People felt safer. In regions once terrorized by lightning, the rod became a symbol of assurance. Children who once cowered during storms now watched with fascination as their fathers checked the rods before a thunderhead approached. The lightning rod had changed not just architecture, but psychology. The age of iron and thunder. As the 19th century progressed, the world entered a period of rapid industrialization. Cities grew taller. Factories rose from brick and steam. Telegraph wires crisscrossed landscapes. Railroads carved straight lines through forests and prairies. Humanity found itself interacting with electricity in new and unexpected ways. The lightning rod, once a lone sentinel on rooftops, now became part of a much larger electrical ecosystem. Iron structures, bridges, telegraph poles, railway stations, invited new forms of lightning interaction. Scientists realized that lightning rods needed to be adapted for the Iron Age. While Franklin had imagined rods primarily for wooden buildings, the industrial world demanded larger, more complex protection systems. Engineers experimented with mesh networks of conductors, grounding grids beneath entire buildings, lightning arresters for telegraph lines, rod arrays extending across factory roofs. In many ways, the lightning rod became an early form of electrical infrastructure. Primitive, yes, but foundational. The telegraph age and its dangers. The invention of the telegraph in the 1830s revolutionized communication. But telegraph lines quickly revealed themselves as dangerously vulnerable to lightning. A single storm could destroy miles of wire, sending showers of sparks through offices and injuring operators. Franklin's principles were now being tested in a new dimension. Telegraph companies scrambled to protect their networks. Early telegraph stations installed lightning rods, only to find that immense currents still surged along the wires during storms. Operators reported seeing blue flames running along the lines, or hearing sudden bursts like gunshots when lightning struck nearby. In one incident in 1846, a bolt sent a violent electric surge down a telegraph line in Pennsylvania, igniting papers and injuring 2 workers. Newspapers called it a most frightful visitation from the heavens. This crisis spurred innovation. Engineers designed lightning arresters devices that diverted sudden surges from telegraph lines into the earth. These arresters were essentially miniature lightning rods, tailored for wires rather than buildings. Thus, the lightning rod philosophy expanded, from protecting static structures to guarding moving currents. Lightning rods in the age of invention. The mid-19th century was the age of great inventors, Faraday, Ohm, Edison, and others. Their discoveries transformed humanity's relationship with electricity, and as electrical devices grew more complex, the need for lightning protection increased. Factories powered by early dynamos were vulnerable to surges. Museums began protecting delicate artifacts. Government observatories installed rods to defend their instruments. Even public monuments were equipped with lightning rods. The Colonne Vendôme in Paris, the Nelson Monument in Edinburgh, the Bunker Hill Monument in Boston, the Washington Monument, begun in 1848, was built with lightning protection in mind. When it was completed decades later, engineers incorporated copper rods and grounding systems directly into its structure. Franklin would have been pleased. His invention had become part of national identity. The Great Fire of Zurich. Despite progress, disasters still struck. One of the most famous occurred in Zurich in 1861, when lightning hit St. Peter's Church. Ironically, a building that had refused to install a rod. The church tower caught fire, and flames spread rapidly through the medieval district. Wind carried embers from rooftop to rooftop. Fire crews fought desperately, but narrow streets hampered movement. By dawn, half the district lay in ruins. More than 500 homes burned. Thousands were left homeless. Afterward, the city council passed sweeping reforms requiring lightning rods on all major buildings. Newspapers across Europe pointed to the catastrophe as an example of the price of superstition. One German editorial declared, "Let this be the final sermon on the folly of rejecting Franklin's gift. The American Eastern Seaboard and the rod, As American cities grew, lightning rods became integral to urban planning. New York, Baltimore, and Charleston mandated rods on warehouses storing flammable goods. Insurance companies provided discounts for buildings with proper installations. A particularly influential event occurred in 1849, when lightning struck a large hotel in Providence, Rhode Island. The building had a large copper rod, but it had not been grounded deeply enough. The strike traveled partially down the rod before jumping into the building's frame, causing a devastating fire. The insurance investigation concluded that poor installation, not the principle itself, was at fault. This resulted in new standardized guidelines for rod installation in the United States. Franklin's invention was no longer a novelty. It was a regulated necessity. The rod and religion. A final reckoning. By the mid-19th century, most theologians accepted lightning rods, but remnants of old beliefs persisted. Some communities still held that storms were divine instruments. A few rural churches resisted rods until late in the century, sometimes with tragic consequences. One of the last major documented church disasters occurred in Kansas in 1878. Lightning struck a small wooden church during Sunday service. The building was not equipped with a rod, despite prior recommendations. The strike killed 3 parishioners and severely injured several others. Afterward, the church finally installed a lightning rod. A local newspaper wrote, "Heaven requires no ringing of bells nor burnt sacrifice. It requires only the wisdom to protect oneself." By the dawn of the 20th century, religious resistance had all but disappeared. Early lightning photography. In the late 19th century, technological advances allowed something remarkable: the first photographs of lightning. Photography pioneers such as William Nicholson Jennings captured the branching patterns of lightning bolts with unprecedented clarity. These photographs validated Franklin's early observations of spark branching. They also offered visual confirmation of theories about charge distribution and step leaders. The photographs inspired public fascination. People saw, perhaps for the first time, that lightning was not a single simple bolt, but a complex branching structure, a tree of fire leaping across the sky. One photographer wrote, "To behold lightning upon glass is to behold nature's script." Lightning rods appeared in many such photographs, their stark lines cutting upward toward the storm like metallic claws. The decline of fear. Generations raised under the protection of lightning rods began to lose the primal fear of thunderstorms that had dominated earlier centuries. Letters from the era reflect this cultural shift. One schoolteacher in Massachusetts wrote in 1875, "My grandmother would hide during storms. My students watched them with wonder. Farmers built barns with iron-tipped confidence. Children played indoors during storms without trembling." People slept through storms with the knowledge that rods guarded their homes. Lightning rods helped spark a psychological transformation as profound as any scientific one. Nature was no longer purely a threat. It was something that could be understood and prepared for. Lightning rod patents and competition. By the late 19th century, the lightning rod business had become highly competitive. Companies produced rods with elaborate ornamentation, arrowhead finials, star-shaped tips, decorative spheres, glass insulators in vibrant colors. Some rods were purely functional. Others were marketed as both protective and ornamental. Salesmen traveled across rural America, in wagons laden with rods, competing fiercely for customers. Rivalry occasionally turned hostile salesmen sabotaged each other's rods or spread rumors that competing designs invited lightning rather than repelled it. Patent records from the 1870s show hundreds of innovations in tip shape, conductor material, grounding systems, rod arrays. A few inventors attempted to improve on Franklin's design with bizarre contraptions: spiraled rods, rotating rods, rods embedded with magnets. Most were ineffective, but the competition drove serious innovations as well. Engineers refined grounding techniques and developed multi-rod systems for large industrial buildings. The lightning rod had moved from science to industry, from theory to enterprise. The age of skyscrapers. As cities expanded upward in the late 19th century, lightning protection entered a new era. Buildings like the Home Insurance Building in Chicago, often considered the first skyscraper, rose far above surrounding structures. Lightning strikes became more frequent and more dangerous. Architects realized that rods alone were not enough. Tall buildings needed integrated protection systems, networks of conductors running through their steel skeletons. Thus the lightning rod evolved into the lightning protection system, a holistic approach that included multiple rooftop rods, conductors inside walls, grounding grids beneath basements, bonding of metal components. This was the first time that lightning protection became part of building design rather than an afterthought. Franklin's simple rod had grown into an architectural principle, a symbol of humanity's relationship with nature. By the end of the 19th century, the lightning rod stood as one of the most influential inventions in history, not because it changed industry or politics directly, but because it marked a turning point in how humanity perceived the natural world. It was a statement that nature could be measured, that danger could be mitigated, that knowledge brought power and responsibility. That enlightenment was possible. An invention that once saved barns now protected skyscrapers. A device born in the hands of a colonial printer now crossed oceans and continents, mountain tops and deserts. A spark caught by a kite had ignited a revolution in human understanding. Franklin had not only captured lightning, he had changed the world's relationship with it. The 20th century dawns. As the 20th century began, humanity stood at the threshold of extraordinary transformations. Electricity, once a mystery sparking from primitive generators, now powered cities. The telegraph had given way to the telephone. Electric street lamps lit boulevards that once glowed only from oil and flame. Lightning, however, remained as formidable as ever. Storms could still topple power lines, destroy factories, ignite oil tanks, and kill livestock. And though lightning rods were nearly universal in developed nations, the sheer scale of new technology demanded new approaches. The industrial world was now connected by wires and cables, pipelines and power stations, radio signals and telephone exchanges. Where Franklin's rod once protected single buildings, society now needed protection for entire networks. Lightning protection was no longer simply a matter of grounding a bolt. It became a matter of securing infrastructures. The emergence of electrical grids. The creation of electrical power grids in the early 1900s transformed lightning into a new kind of threat. Power lines stretched hundreds of miles across fields and mountains. Transformers hummed at substations. Generators spun in hydroelectric plants. Lightning striking a single line could send a surge through vast portions of the grid, damaging equipment miles away. Electrical engineers began developing new strategies. Surge arresters, grounding rings around substations, lightning-resistant insulators, lightning fault detectors, zigzag grounding wires atop high-voltage lines. The lightning rod had evolved into an entire field of engineering, lightning protection and surge management. Franklin, who once marveled at the spark of a Leyden jar, would have been astonished. The Eiffel Tower. As a giant lightning sensor, one of the most dramatic developments occurred in Paris at the end of the 19th century, the construction of the Eiffel Tower in 1889. Standing more than 300 meters tall, the tower became one of the most frequently struck structures in the world. Engineers anticipated this and equipped it with an advanced lightning rod system at its pinnacle, with heavy copper conductors running down its legs to ground. But the tower became more than protected. It became a laboratory. Physicist Edouard Branly, a pioneer in wireless telegraphy, studied the tower's lightning activity. During storms, he recorded enormous surges, some exceeding anything known at the time. This data allowed Branly and others to refine early theories of electromagnetic radiation. Meanwhile, the French army used tower-mounted equipment to study atmospheric electricity, confirming long-held suspicions. Lightning was part of a complex dynamic electrical exchange between the Earth and the sky. The Eiffel Tower had become the world's largest lightning experiment, an unintentional successor to Franklin's kite. Shaking hands with the sky. Early lightning researchers. The early 20th century saw the rise of daring scientists who investigated lightning up close. Many risked their lives. Some barely survived. One of the most influential was C.T.R. Wilson, a Scottish physicist whose work revolutionized atmospheric electricity. Wilson developed the cloud chamber, a device that later became essential in particle physics, but he was equally fascinated by thunderstorms. He proposed early theories of charge separation within clouds ideas that still influence lightning science today. Wilson also attempted to generate artificial lightning using tall metal poles, echoing Franklin's steeple experiment ambitions. His studies helped establish the fundamentals of lightning discharge, including the concept of step leaders and return strokes. Wilson once wrote, "Each flash of lightning is but the earth and sky shaking hands." His poetic phrasing captured both the danger and elegance of the phenomenon. The new role of lightning, rods in the city. As skyscrapers began to dominate skylines, New York, Chicago, London, Tokyo, the lightning rod's role expanded. No longer a simple pointed conductor, rods were now integrated into steel frameworks, elevator shafts, ventilation systems, reinforced concrete skeletons. Engineers built entire lightning networks hidden within structures. In the Empire State Building, for example, dozens of lightning rods feed current into heavy copper cables bolted to the steel frame, which then transfers lightning into deep grounding pits. The Empire State Building is struck by lightning around 20 to 25 times every year, and yet has never suffered structural damage from a strike. Franklin's principle, applied on a monumental scale, was quietly at work. Lightning and the human body. The 20th century also brought significant understanding of the effects of lightning on the human body. Medical journals from the 1920s and 1930s contain detailed accounts. Skin patterns, known as Lichtenberg figures, cardiac arrest from electrical shock, neurological damage and memory loss, temporary blindness or deafness, long-term psychological effects. Doctors began treating lightning injuries with the same urgency as electrical shock, developing protocols for resuscitation and recognizing the need for immediate cardiac support. Interestingly, Franklin had speculated about lightning's effects on the body in his writings, though he lacked the tools to investigate. 2 centuries later, his curiosity found its answers. AR planes enter the storm. The invention of the airplane opened a new frontier in lightning protection. Aircraft, flying miles above the ground, frequently encountered electrical storms. Early pilots reported terrifying experiences. Blue glows on wingtips, sparks dancing across windshields, St. Elmo's fire surrounding propellers. The Wright brothers themselves experienced minor electrical disturbances during test flights. As aircraft grew larger and faster, engineers realized that lightning strikes were inevitable. Modern airplanes are struck by lightning on average once every 1,000 flight hours, yet passengers rarely notice. This is because engineers applied Franklin's principle. Give electricity a safe path. Aircraft bodies are made of conductive materials. Lightning travels along the fuselage and exits through specially designed discharge points. Sensitive electronics are shielded, and fuel tanks are engineered to prevent ignition. Every airplane in the sky today carries Franklin's legacy. The sky as a laboratory. Lightning research expands. By the mid-20th century, lightning studies entered an unprecedented era of sophistication. Scientists launched rockets into thunderstorms, dragging wires behind them to trigger lightning. This allowed controlled study of electrical currents and discharge patterns. Researchers mapped storm structure using radar, high-speed photography, electromagnetic sensors, weather balloons. Institutions in Florida, New Mexico, Japan, and Australia became world centers for lightning research. The fundamental questions Franklin had raised still guided them. Why does lightning begin? What determines its path? How can humans predict or influence it? The answers remained incomplete, but knowledge deepened. The industrial age brings new risks. Lightning posed new threats in the 20th century. Oil refineries, chemical plants, air traffic control towers, nuclear facilities, skyscrapers with sensitive electronics. A single strike could trigger catastrophic fires or explosions. Engineers responded by creating complex protection systems combining Franklin rods, surge protectors, Faraday cages, grounding grids, shielded wiring. Thus, the lightning rod became part of a larger philosophy of electrical safety. Lightning as an environmental force. Scientists also began linking lightning to ecological and atmospheric processes. Wildfires. Lightning ignites many of the world's forest fires, and some ecosystems depend on these cycles. Nitrogen fixation. Lightning helps convert atmospheric nitrogen into forms usable by plants. Global electrical circuits. Lightning is part of a planetary-scale electrical loop connecting the atmosphere and Earth. Franklin had once speculated whether thunder shook the soil and influenced plant growth. 200 years later, researchers confirmed lightning's role in fertilizing ecosystems. The legacy of misunderstanding. Even in the modern era, myths persisted. Some people believed lightning rods attracted lightning rather than merely providing safe paths. Others tried installing rods indoors, useless, painting rods to charge them, nonsense, or placing rods in locations that created more danger than safety. One modern myth insisted that a cross on a church steeple acted as a lightning rod, and needed no grounding disasters proved otherwise. But the most dangerous misunderstanding was this: that lightning rods rendered buildings completely immune to lightning damage. In truth, rods reduce risk dramatically, but only when properly installed. A cheaply made or incorrectly grounded rod is worse than none at all. Something Franklin himself understood intuitively. The rod in popular culture. By the 20th century, lightning rods appeared in films, novels, advertisements, children's textbooks, paintings, comic books. They symbolized protection, science, courage, or sometimes mad ambition. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein popularized the idea of harnessing lightning to create life, though it bore little relation to the actual scientific work of the era. Still, the association between electricity and creation, based partly on Franklin's discoveries, influenced generations of storytellers. Lightning rods became icons in Gothic literature and horror films, perched atop haunted mansions and lonely laboratories. Always the same silhouette, a needle pointing toward the storm. The rod and the sky of war. During the World Wars, lightning protection took on new significance. Ammunition factories required extensive grounding. Radar installations needed shielding. Hangars and airfields were fitted with large rod arrays. Military ships used advanced versions of Franklin's system. In some instances, lightning strikes disrupted communications or damaged equipment during critical operations, prompting intense study. One notable event occurred in 1943, when lightning struck a German radar tower on the French coast, causing temporary blindness to technicians and damaging equipment. Allied scientists, learning of the incident, improved lightning protection on their own installations. Lightning did not care about sides. It struck German and Allied structures alike. The philosophy of protection. By mid-century, scientists began articulating a broader idea, that lightning protection was not merely technical, it was philosophical. Franklin's invention symbolized a new relationship between humanity and nature. Respect rather than fear, preparedness rather than helplessness, understanding rather than superstition. This mindset influenced fields beyond meteorology. Disaster preparedness, electrical engineering, building safety, aviation standards. The lightning rod suggested that humanity could coexist with powerful natural forces without attempting domination or surrender. It was a device of humility and confidence simultaneously. The continuous threat. Despite widespread protection, lightning still caused massive damage worldwide. Thousands of wildfires each year, hundreds of human deaths, billions in property damage, destruction of electronics and infrastructure. In developing regions without widespread lightning rods, the toll was especially severe. Hospitals, schools, and homes often lacked protection. Researchers began advocating for inexpensive lightning rod programs in countries prone to severe storms. Franklin's invention, though centuries old, was still saving lives and still needed. An enduring, simple genius. By the late 20th century, lightning protection had become a mature science. Yet Franklin's basic principle remained unchanged. Provide a sharp conductor, a low-resistance path, and a deep grounding point. The original three rules still guided engineers designing protection for homes, hospitals, data centers, radio towers, wind turbines, airports, Franklin, with his handmade kite and key, had built something timeless. The lightning age of computers. As the 20th century progressed into its latter half, the world underwent another revolution. One not of steel or steam or even electricity alone, but of information. Computers emerged first as massive machines housed in climate-controlled rooms, then as smaller units powering businesses, then as personal devices, and finally as the digital infrastructure underlying modern civilization. Lightning, once feared mainly for its fiery destruction, now posed an additional, uniquely modern threat: data loss and electronic failure. A lightning strike a mile away could send microsecond-long surges through power lines, destroying sensitive circuitry. Early computers were notoriously vulnerable. Many companies learned this the hard way. In 1965, a bolt struck the roof of a manufacturing plant in Milwaukee. Though the building's lightning rods protected the structure itself, the electrical surge traveled through unshielded cables and damaged every computer module on the production floor. Engineers estimated the loss at $500,000, a staggering sum for the time. Incidents like this led to the birth of a new industry: surge protection. Surge protectors, though different in form, were based on exactly the same principle Franklin used in 1752: give electricity a path. Modern versions employed varistors, gas discharge tubes, metal oxide arresters, shielded circuits, ground fault interrupters. These devices served as lightning rods for electronics. Franklin would have smiled at the idea of protecting machines he could scarcely imagine using the very concept he discovered with a wet hemp string and a key. Lightning and spaceflight. The mid-20th century brought humanity to a place Franklin never dreamed of: the edge of the atmosphere, where lightning itself is born. When rockets began to climb through thunderclouds, engineers realized they were flying directly into the most electrically unstable region of the planet. Unlike airplanes designed to tolerate lightning, rockets were immense metal bodies filled with oxygen, hydrogen, and volatile propellants. A single premature lightning strike could destroy an entire launch, and it nearly did. On November 14, 1969, the Saturn V rocket carrying Apollo 12 was struck by lightning twice just after launch. A giant electrical discharge traveled down the rocket's body, momentarily knocking out guidance systems and telemetry. The spacecraft teetered on the edge of disaster. Miraculously, the mission survived. Engineers later discovered that the rocket had effectively triggered the strike by creating a conductive path through the charged atmosphere, an effect first predicted by C.T.R. Wilson decades earlier. NASA responded by developing lightning monitoring towers, launch pad grounding grids, storm analysis tools, no launch weather criteria. Lightning rods were installed around launch complexes, massive structures standing over 100 meters tall, designed to intercept strikes before they could reach spacecraft. Thus, Franklin's rod became part of the space age. Lightning above the clouds, new discoveries. In 1989, pilots flying over the Midwest reported something astonishing: huge flashes of red and blue light high above storm clouds. Scientists had suspected such phenomena for years, but no one had captured clear evidence. These were sprites, blue jets, and elves forms of high-altitude lightning occurring up to 50 miles above the Earth. Franklin had speculated that storms affected the upper atmosphere, but he never imagined lightning extending far beyond the clouds themselves. Modern satellites confirmed his intuition. storms are part of a vast electrical ecosystem, reaching from the ground to the edge of space. Today we know. Sprites leap upward in thin red tendrils. Blue jets shoot from the tops of thunderstorms. Elves form expanding rings of electromagnetic energy. Lightning is not a single phenomenon. It is a family of related processes stretching across layers of the atmosphere. Detecting lightning from space. The 20th century ended with another breakthrough. Satellites equipped with lightning monitoring instruments. NASA's Lightning Imaging Sensor, LIS, and Optical Transient Detector, OTD, could see lightning anywhere on the globe, day or night. For the first time in history, humanity mapped lightning across oceans, deserts, jungles, and remote mountain ranges. We learned that the Congo Basin has the highest lightning density on Earth. Lake Maracaibo in Venezuela sees storms almost every night. The Himalayas produce some of the world's most powerful discharges. Florida is the lightning capital of the United States. These discoveries shaped modern meteorology, aviation safety, and climate science. None of it would have been possible without the conceptual leap made by Franklin in the 18th century. That lightning was electrical, measurable, and governed by laws. The lightning rod enters modern architecture. Modern skyscrapers' accomplishments of steel, reinforced concrete, and glass present unique lightning challenges. Engineers learned that extremely tall buildings can be struck dozens of times per year. The Sears Tower, now Willis Tower, in Chicago, for example, is hit up to 100 times annually. This required more sophisticated solutions. Multiple rooftop rods, internal steel frame grounding, lightning shields, electrical bonding of all major metal components, redundant grounding grids. Architects began incorporating lightning protection into the earliest phases of design. Building codes evolved to require rods and grounding systems as essential safety components. Franklin's one rod had grown into a distributed system, woven invisibly into the skeletons of modern structures. The lightning rod in rural communities. Despite technological progress, lightning continued to devastate rural areas in developing countries. In parts of Africa, Southeast Asia, and South America, lightning killed hundreds each year. Many villages lacked even basic protection. Houses made of wood, thatch, or mud brick were especially vulnerable. Schools and hospitals often had no rods at all. Humanitarian organizations began promoting low-cost lightning rod programs based directly on Franklin's original design simple metal rods, grounded by copper or iron wires. These programs saved lives. In Uganda, introduction of basic rods reduced school lightning deaths dramatically. In Nepal, simple grounding rods installed on rooftops prevented fires in mountain villages where storms were frequent and severe. More than 2 centuries after Franklin's kite flew in Philadelphia, his invention continued to change lives far from where it was born. The science of why Franklin was right. Modern physics validated Franklin's key insights. 1. Sharp points leak charge. A sharp conductor concentrates electrical potential. This creates corona discharge, a faint ionization that bleeds charge into the air. Franklin correctly deduced this from his simple experiments with sparks. 2. Lightning follows the easiest path. Electrical discharge seeks a low-resistance route. A properly grounded rod provides one. Franklin understood this even before Ohm's law was formulated. 3. Lightning is not a single strike. It is a sequence of return strokes preceded by an invisible step leader, something Franklin could not see, but whose behavior he predicted when he noted that lightning did not always travel in a straight line. 4. Grounding is everything Franklin insisted that the rod must reach deep into moist earth. Today's engineers confirm that grounding is often the determining factor between safety and disaster. Every principle Franklin inferred empirically is now standard knowledge. The human dimension of the lightning rod. Beyond the science, the lightning rod shaped human culture. 1. It reshaped fear. Before the rod, storms meant terrifiers, death, divine wrath. After the rod, storms became manageable risks. 2. It symbolized enlightenment. The rod represented a world where reason triumphed over superstition. 3. It became part of the landscape. Lightning rods are so common that many forget their revolutionary origins. 4. It changed architecture, roofs, towers, domes, all incorporated rods as naturally as chimneys or gutters. Lightning research today. The 21st century brought powerful new tools. High-speed cameras capturing millions of frames per second, supercomputers simulating thunderstorm physics, artificial intelligence for storm prediction, robotic storm chasers, satellites mapping global electrical activity, instruments measuring gamma-ray flashes during storms. Yes, gamma rays. Scientists discovered that lightning produces terrestrial gamma-ray flashes, TGFs, extremely energetic bursts of radiation once thought possible only in deep space. Lightning, it turned out, was far more complex and powerful than Franklin imagined. And yet, the simple rod remained effective. The continuity of a simple truth. Despite centuries of scientific advancement, the core of lightning protection remains unchanged. A metal point, a conductive path, a grounding system. This elegant idea, first tested by an American philosopher, with a kite still guards the tallest skyscrapers, the fastest planes, and the most sensitive electronics. Franklin's invention endures because it is grounded in the laws of nature themselves. Nearing the end of a journey, by this point in the story, we have traveled from the colonial fields of Philadelphia, through the Enlightenment, across Europe, Asia, Africa, and the Americas, into skyscrapers and satellites, through the Industrial Age and the Computer Age, upward into thunderstorms and beyond them. The lightning rod story is also the story of human curiosity, a story of humility before nature and confidence that knowledge can illuminate danger. And yet, one more great chapter remains: the modern era of lightning science and the philosophical legacy of Franklin's achievement. The lightning rod in the 21st century. As the 21st century began, humanity had reached extraordinary heights in engineering, science, and global communication. Skyscrapers pierced clouds. Airplanes carried hundreds of passengers across continents. Satellites circled the planet relaying images, signals, and data. And still lightning struck. It struck glass towers and wind turbines, telecommunication hubs and rural villages, airports and farms, mountain-top observatories and oil refineries. It struck the sea, the desert, the jungle, the tundra, the prairie. It struck cities of millions and solitary cabins in deep forests. For all our progress, lightning remained a universal force, unchanged from the bolts that terrified early civilizations. And yet, humanity was no longer helpless before it. The lightning rod Franklin's slender spear of metal continued to protect life and property across the globe. But in the 21st century, lightning protection systems evolved into something far more sophisticated than a simple rod connected to the ground. They became part of a planetary electrical infrastructure. The modern lightning protection system, contemporary lightning protection, is built around a network of interdependent components. Air terminals, rods that intercept strikes, conductors, paths carrying lightning to the ground, bonding, connecting all metal parts of a building, grounding grids, deep networks of buried conductors, surge protectors, shielding electrical systems, equipotential zones, equalizing voltage to prevent dangerous differences. This system goes far beyond Franklin's original idea, but it remains faithful to the core principle: guide lightning safely to the earth. In a modern skyscraper, hundreds of rods work together. Copper ribbons run through walls and elevator shafts. Grounding grids extend deep below basements and parking structures. Sensitive electronics are shielded by layers of surge suppression and metal enclosures. The lightning rod is no longer alone. It is the tip of a vast invisible tree of conductors protecting everything beneath it. The lightning-resistant world. 21st century society depends on uninterrupted electrical power. Lightning can disrupt data centers, airports, hospitals, stock exchanges, communication towers, railway control systems, military bases. Engineers therefore developed specialized lightning protection tailored for each sector. 1. Data centers. These are among the most protected buildings on Earth. A lightning-induced surge could wipe out billions of dollars of data in seconds. Protection involves multi-layer surge suppression, Faraday cages around critical equipment, redundant grounding networks, massive copper bus bars distributing charge safely, rooftop rod arrays. Lightning rods guard not a structure, but the very information the modern world depends on. 2. Hospitals' life support machines, surgical devices, and diagnostic equipment require absolute continuity. Lightning protection in hospitals includes isolated grounding grids, shielded power systems, lightning-resistant HVAC control, emergency microgrid isolation. Here, Franklin's idea literally saves lives every year. 3. Airports, runways, control towers, and radar systems are vulnerable. Protection includes tall rod arrays, lightning-resistant communications, underground grounding rings, lightning detection sensors. A strike at an airport doesn't only threaten a building, it can disrupt the movements of thousands of people. With the wind turbine challenge. Wind turbines, some taller than skyscrapers, became a new frontier for lightning science. Their height and rotating blades make them ideal lightning targets. A single bolt can shatter a blade, ignite internal components, disable generators, start wildfires. Scientists developed lightning receptors built into blades, carbon fiber conductive paths, specialized grounding within the turbine shaft, surge protectors for power electronics. Modern wind turbines are among the most heavily protected structures in the world. Yet even with advanced systems, lightning damage remains common proof of nature's raw power. The rod in extreme environments. Lightning protection adapted to environments Franklin never imagined. 1. High mountain observatories. Lightning frequently strikes telescopes sitting above the clouds. Operators protect instruments with Faraday enclosures, isolated metal domes, telescoping lightning rods. 2. Offshore oil platforms. These floating cities are surrounded by explosive materials. Lightning protection is mandatory. Mast-mounted rod arrays, deck bonding, gas line shielding, emergency shutdown circuits. 3. Space launch centers. NASA, ESA, and private companies like SpaceX maintain enormous lightning towers. At Cape Canaveral, some towers exceed 120 meters and connect to miles of grounding cable. These rods shield rockets from destruction and astronauts from death. 4. Nuclear facilities. Perhaps nowhere is lightning protection more stringent. Reactors, cooling systems, and control rooms are shielded by lightning arresters, massive grounding meshes, independent power isolation, redundant surge lines. Franklin could never have foreseen such applications, yet his logic forms their backbone. The spread of advanced lightning knowledge. Lightning science entered fields far beyond electricity. Meteorology, high-frequency lightning detection networks help track storms. Lightning is often a precursor to tornado formation, severe wind bursts, microbursts, weather fronts, developing hurricanes. Climate science. Lightning patterns provide clues about global warming, atmospheric instability, convection patterns, ocean-atmosphere interactions. Environmental management. Lightning-caused wildfires are monitored with satellite-based lightning detection to coordinate rapid firefighting responses. Agriculture farmers use lightning data to protect livestock, anticipate storms, manage irrigation, ensure worker safety. Lightning became not only a threat, but a tool for understanding nature. The new lightning technologies. In the 21st century, scientists pushed lightning protection further with technologies Franklin would have considered miraculous. 1. Laser-guided lightning protection. Experiments in Switzerland and France used high-powered lasers to create conductive ionized channels in the air. These laser rods can potentially divert lightning away from airports, protect rocket launch pads, shield entire industrial complexes. In 2021, a laser system successfully guided lightning during a storm, a breakthrough that made global headlines. 2. Smart lightning sensors. Modern buildings contain sensors that detect changes in atmospheric charge, approaching step leaders, electromagnetic pulses. These systems can shut down equipment milliseconds before a strike. 3. Artificial intelligence prediction. AI systems analyze satellite data and ground sensors to predict lightning activity, hours or minutes before it occurs. This aids airports, energy grids, emergency responders, climate researchers. Lightning has become data. 4. Drone storm chasers. Autonomous drones now sample electrical fields inside storms. They risk what would kill a human to gather real-time data. Franklin might have called them mechanical kites. 5. Extreme height lightning towers. Japan, China, and the U.S. built test towers up to 500 meters tall to study lightning behavior. These towers collect voltage data, current waveforms, magnetic field measurements, gamma-ray signatures. What Franklin glimpsed once with a key, scientists now record with supercomputers. Public misconceptions still. Despite progress, myths remain common. Lightning never strikes the same place twice. It does, constantly. Rubber tires protect a car. It's the metal frame, not the tires. Tall trees protect homes. they often increase risk. Lightning rods attract lightning. They only safely intercept when necessary. Wooden houses don't need rods. They are actually most vulnerable. Public education remains crucial. Franklin's legacy is sometimes obscured by modern folklore. To the rod as a symbol, the lightning rod still represents something larger than metal and bolts of electricity. 1. Rationality. It remains one of the most iconic triumphs of reason over fear. 2. Control without arrogance. Unlike dams, reactors, or engines, the rod does not attempt to stop nature, only to cooperate with it. 3. The Enlightenment spirit. It stands for the belief that the world is knowable. 4. The human spark. It symbolizes courage, curiosity, and a willingness to ask difficult questions. Franklin's rod is not only a tool, it is a philosophy of coexistence with the forces of nature. The golden thread through time. We can now trace Franklin's influence through more than 270 years. From kite strings to satellites, from wooden barns to supercomputers, from colonial America to every continent, from the spark of a key to gamma-ray flashes, from a simple rod to laser-guided lightning channels. A continuous line of innovation, an unbroken chain of curiosity links that first experiment to the most advanced research today. Lightning remains one of nature's greatest powers, and Franklin's invention remains one of humanity's greatest responses. The modern scientists who chase lightning, the 21st century has produced a new breed of scientists, storm chasers, atmospheric physicists, engineers, drone pilots, satellite analysts, united by a single pursuit. Understanding lightning at a level of precision Franklin could only have dreamed of. They race into the heart of storms, drive armored vehicles across open plains, fly drones into towering cumulonimbus clouds, and track bolts from space. These researchers embody the same spirit Franklin showed in 1752, the conviction that knowledge is worth the risk. Among them are several groundbreaking pioneers. The Florida Lightning Complex. Florida, especially the center of the peninsula, is one of the most lightning-prone regions on Earth. This made it a prime location for the International Center for Lightning Research and Testing, ICLRT, established near Gainesville. Here, scientists perform a feat that would have stunned Franklin. They trigger lightning on command. Using rockets trailing thin wires, they create conductive paths between thunderclouds and the ground. When charged regions align, lightning follows the wire, striking precisely where scientists want it to. This allows measurements of current peaks, voltage surges, magnetic field dynamics, channel temperature, shockwave formation. Franklin's kite had once attracted a natural strike. Now humanity deliberately summons lightning safely. One researcher joked, "We chase lightning the way other people chase sunsets." But behind the humor lies life-risking precision. Triggered lightning experiments have informed aircraft lightning standards, building codes, surge protector design, grid resilience, rocket launch safety. The Florida site is, in many ways, a direct descendant of Franklin's experiment. The lightning researchers of Japan. Japan, a country of mountains and storms, has become a world leader in high-altitude lightning study. Their massive towers on Mount Sampo, Mount Hotaka, and Mount Fuji intercept dozens of lightning strikes each year. Scientists at these stations record ultra-high-speed videos, electromagnetic waveforms, optical signals, X-ray and gamma-ray bursts. The Japanese discoveries fundamentally changed lightning science. They proved that lightning sometimes emits bursts of gamma radiation. Upward lightning from skyscrapers is more common than thought. Volcanic eruptions can produce lightning storms inside ash clouds. Lightning behavior differs dramatically by altitude. Franklin had once proposed that electricity existed in the upper atmosphere. Japan proved it with unprecedented detail. The Mount Fuji Observatory, often enveloped in storms, is said to be the most elegant lightning lab on Earth, high above the clouds, where bolts strike almost horizontally in violent winter storms. With the rise of upward lightning, for centuries, lightning was assumed to travel only from cloud to ground. Franklin himself believed this, though he suspected complexity beyond simple downward flashes. Modern research revealed something astonishing. Lightning can rise from the ground toward the clouds. This upward lightning often begins at the tips of tall structures, TV towers, skyscrapers, wind turbines, mountain radio masts. It occurs when electrically charged storm layers create conditions that allow conductive plasma channels to stretch from buildings toward the sky. Records from Brazil, Japan, the US, and Europe show thousands of such events each year. High-speed cameras reveal upward lightning as graceful, branching tendrils climbing skyward. It sometimes occurs without a visible downward leader, meaning the lightning rod itself can initiate the discharge. This discovery validated Franklin's notion that sharp metal points could draw off electricity from the sky. Upward lightning changed how engineers design skyscraper rod systems, communication towers, wind turbine protection, electronics shielding. It is lightning that goes home. The lightning-induced gamma-ray mystery. One of the greatest breakthroughs of the 21st century was the discovery of terrestrial gamma-ray flashes, TGFs. These incredibly powerful bursts of radiation, first detected by satellites in the 1990s, are produced within thunderstorms. They last only milliseconds, but can emit more energy than medical X-ray machines. Lightning, it turns out, accelerates electrons to near light speed. These electrons collide with air molecules, creating gamma rays, just as cosmic phenomena do in deep space. Franklin had marveled at the explosive nature of lightning. He would have been astonished to learn it creates radiation that scientists once believed existed only around supernovas or black holes. TGFs forced physicists to reconsider the structure of storm electric fields, the formation of leader channels, the role of cosmic rays in initiating lightning, the relationship between thunderstorms and upper atmosphere chemistry. It is perhaps the closest humanity has come to seeing lightning as Franklin imagined it, a bridge between Earth and the heavens. The search for the first flash. Even now, scientists still debate the question Franklin asked implicitly in his kite experiment. How does lightning begin? We know lightning involves charge separation within clouds. We know that ice particles, water droplets, and wind shear create enormous electrical potentials. We know that leaders' channels of ionized air grow downward in steps. But the very first spark, the moment lightning begins, remains mysterious. Some theories include 1. Cosmic ray. Triggering high-energy particles from space strike the atmosphere, creating ionized trails that seed lightning. 2. Turbulent mixing wind shear creates zones of intense electrical concentration. 3. Fractal charge. Cascades. Charge arranges itself in branching patterns that collapse suddenly. 4. Relativistic runaway electron avalanches. Particles accelerate to relativistic speeds, creating a chain reaction of ionization. Scientists worldwide continue studying this question. Franklin would recognize the spirit of inquiry, even as he marveled at the tools available. The philosophy of lightning and human understanding. Lightning research is more than physics. It asks fundamental questions. How does nature organize chaos? What forces shape storms? Why does danger follow patterns? How do simple laws create complex outcomes? Franklin answered these questions pragmatically, by building a rod that worked. But modern science seeks theoretical elegance as well. Lightning, in many ways, represents the relationship between humanity and nature. Powerful, yet predictable. Dangerous, yet measurable. Destructive, yet essential. Chaotic, yet lawful. The lightning rod symbolizes our place within this relationship, not above nature, but understanding it. Lightning and the modern world's dependence on electricity. Electricity is the lifeblood of modern civilization. Lightning threatens this system at every level. Power plants, high-voltage transmission lines, transformers, substations, communication networks, fiber optic interfaces, semiconductor chips. One strike can cascade through banking systems, internet backbones, airport control, emergency services, critical medical equipment. To counter this, engineers designed protection frameworks that combine Franklin rods, surge arresters, shielded conduits, transformer grounding, redundant routing, electromagnetic shielding. The modern world remains stable, partly because of lightning protection built on Franklin's conceptual foundation. The human experience of lightning. People have reacted to lightning differently across ages. In ancient worlds, lightning was a message from gods. In Franklin's time, it was a scientific mystery, frightening but knowable. In the 19th century, it was a natural hazard to be mitigated. In the 20th century, it became an engineering challenge. In the 21st century, it is a window into atmospheric, environmental, and even cosmic physics. Science transformed lightning from myth to mechanism, but it never stripped away its awe. Standing near a rod during a storm, hearing the metallic buzz of corona discharge, remains a profound experience. One feels both small and safe at the same time. Perhaps that is why Franklin's invention resonates so deeply. It protects without diminishing the wonder of the storm. Would disarm the lightning and art, culture, and human imagination. Lightning rods have permeated culture as symbols. Gothic mansions with iron spikes, mad scientists summoning storms, Victorian weather vanes with lightning finials, Art Deco skyscrapers crowned with spires, modern sci-fi cities pulsing with electric towers. Lightning became a symbol of inspiration, a lightning bolt idea, a mark of sudden change, a bolt from the blue, a metaphor for power, electric personality. Artists embraced the imagery. Turner painted storms as celestial battles. Expressionists used lightning as raw emotion. Photographers captured its branching geometry. Filmmakers framed lightning rods as harbingers of drama. Franklin inadvertently gave the world a symbol as much as a tool. The Global Lightning Network. Today, more than a dozen countries participate in an unprecedented project, the Worldwide Lightning Location Network, LLN. Using sensors placed around the planet, the network triangulates lightning strikes in real time. It can detect millions of bolts daily, with precision measured in kilometers. This data helps track severe storms, warn pilots, protect power grids, guide maritime shipping, forecast wildfires, study global climate, analyze atmospheric chemistry. The network is, in a sense, Franklin's ultimate vision, a global system that observes and understands lightning everywhere on Earth, from one man flying a kite over a field to satellites orbiting the globe. That is the long arc of the lightning rod's legacy. The final legacy of a simple experiment. The story that began with a kite flying above a muddy field in 1752 now spans nearly 3 centuries. What started as an experiment performed by a curious colonial printer evolved into a global scientific endeavor, protecting billions of people, enabling skyscrapers, safeguarding spacecraft, guiding flight, powering electrical grids, and shaping our understanding of the sky. Yet, to understand the true magnitude of Franklin's invention, we must return to where it began, not with copper and iron, but with questions. Franklin believed that nature followed laws. He believed that danger could be studied, measured, understood. And above all, he believed that knowledge belonged to everyone, that scientific discoveries should serve humanity, not merely enrich their discoverers. These beliefs shaped not only the lightning rod, but the world it helped create. The final chapter of this story belongs not to rods and bolts, but to Franklin himself, the man whose curiosity changed the world. For Franklin, in his own words, Benjamin Franklin never expressed fear of lightning. Rather, he expressed fascination. In one letter, he described a storm as a majestic electrical concert. In another, he wrote, "The greatest delight of the mind is solving the appearances of nature." Franklin did not invent the lightning rod purely to protect buildings. He invented it to answer a question. Is lightning the same electricity we see in laboratories? His experiment was simple. A kite, a key, a storm. But simplicity is deceptive. Beneath it lay profound insight. He recognized that storms built electrical tension, that a conductor could attract or guide charge, that grounding could safely dissipate electrical energy, that what terrified generations could be understood rationally. His genius was not in complexity, but clarity. The courage of curiosity. Franklin's experiment was dangerous, perhaps more than he realized. Historians still debate whether he directly touched the key during the storm. Most agree he did not. But even the attempt exposed him to lethal conditions. European scientists who performed similar experiments were killed. Franklin survived not because he was lucky, but because he understood what he was doing. He stood under a shed, isolating himself from the kite string. He grounded the apparatus properly. He observed without touching. Most importantly, he trusted reason over fear. Lightning in Franklin's time was seen by many as divine punishment, supernatural wrath, a cosmic weapon, a message from the heavens. To challenge such beliefs required courage, not only physical but intellectual. Franklin's experiment was an act of defiance against superstition. He once wrote, "The noblest question in the world is, what good may I do in it?" The lightning rod was his answer. The transformation of fear. To appreciate the significance of the lightning rod, imagine a world without it. A world where each storm might bring the burning of entire city blocks, the destruction of farms and barns, explosions of mills and powder stores, death of bell ringers, farmers, laborers, terror rippling through households, helplessness before the sky. Before Franklin, lightning was not merely a hazard. It was an existential fear woven into daily life. After Franklin, lightning became manageable, not defeated, not tamed, but understood. This shift in psychology changed societies. People who once prayed for storms to pass now simply checked the grounding wires on their roofs. Fear gave way to knowledge. Superstition gave way to science. Helplessness gave way to preparedness. This is the true power of the lightning rod, not the metal itself, but the transformation it catalyzed in the human mind. The rod as a moral symbol. Franklin's invention carried profound philosophical implications. 1. That humans could protect themselves without opposing nature. The lightning rod does not fight the storm. It collaborates with physics, guiding energy along a safe path. 2. That understanding is superior to ritual. The rod replaced church bells, prayers, and sacrifices with grounded conductors. 3. That knowledge reduces suffering. In the centuries after its invention, the rod prevented countless fires and deaths. 4. That humility is compatible with mastery. Franklin did not claim to control the heavens. He merely discovered how to coexist with their power. This philosophy, quiet, pragmatic, humane, became embedded in the Enlightenment and echoed through generations of scientists. The lightning rod as a seed of democratized science. One of Franklin's most remarkable traits was his willingness to share discoveries freely. He never patented the lightning rod, bifocal glasses, the Franklin stove, his ship designs, his musical instrument, the glass harmonica. Franklin believed that knowledge was a public good. Patent law existed, but he refused to use it for inventions intended to benefit society. In a 1783 letter, he wrote, "As we enjoy great advantages from the inventions of others, we should be glad to serve others by any invention of ours." This ethos resonated deeply. The lightning rod became one of the first scientific advances, broadly adopted across all classes: farmers, merchants, nobility, universities, factories, monasteries, theaters, ships, palaces. It was egalitarian. It was practical. It was affordable. It was universal. Franklin democratized not only the protection from lightning, but the very idea that science should serve everyone. The spirit of experimentation. Franklin's life embodied the transition from mystical fear to scientific curiosity. He believed that any person, without noble birth or classical training, could learn about the world by asking good questions and performing simple experiments. His writings emphasized observation, measurement, repeatability, skepticism, ingenuity. These principles became the foundation of modern scientific thinking. Franklin's experiment with the kite was not just an isolated event. It was a cultural milestone, demonstrating that knowledge could be built from first-hand experience, not handed down from authorities. This spirit spread across the Atlantic and into European science. Voltaire praised Franklin. Priestley admired him. Kant referenced him. The French Academy inducted him. Princes invited him. University students idolized him. Common people hung his portraits in their homes. Franklin's kite became as symbolic as Newton's apple. To the rod and human progress. It is rare for a single invention to influence so many areas of life. Architecture, agriculture, industry, navigation, religion, psychology, politics, meteorology, electrical engineering, space exploration. The lightning rod touched all these fields and more. Consider these transformations. 1. Cities could grow upward. Lightning rods allowed for taller buildings without catastrophic risk. 2. Factories became safer. Industrial fires decreased dramatically. 3. Navigation improved. Ships survived storms that once would have been fatal. 4. Science-advanced lightning research opened pathways to electromagnetism, plasma physics, and atmospheric science. 5. Human psychology evolved. People became less fearful of storms. 6. Infrastructure modernized electrical grid protection owes much to Franklin's principles. 7. Spaceflight became possible. Rockets rely on lightning protection both on the ground and in ascent. A simple rod of metal indirectly enabled skyscrapers and satellites. Considered a world without the rod. Had Franklin never flown his kite, lightning protection might still have been discovered. But when? And by whom? Europe debated religious explanations for lightning for decades after Franklin's success. Culturally, scientifically, politically, the world was primed to resist the idea that storms could be understood and guided. Without Franklin, fires would have devastated wooden cities well into the 1800s. Powder magazines would have exploded with greater frequency. Ships would have burned and sunk in storms. The Industrial Revolution would have been far riskier. Electrical infrastructure might have been delayed. Superstition could have persisted much longer. Franklin accelerated global progress by decades, perhaps centuries. The last years of Benjamin Franklin. For all his renown, Franklin remained humble. In his final years, he walked slowly through Philadelphia, leaning on a cane, his hair white, his eyesight failing, but his mind still sharp. Visitors described him as warm, witty, curious. He delighted in conversation with children as much as with statesmen. In 1789, the year before his death, a lightning strike hit the hospital whose rod he had designed. When told the rod protected the building, Franklin smiled and said, "Let it stand as proof that reason supersedes terror." Even near the end of his life, Franklin continued to receive letters from scientists worldwide, seeking his opinions on electrical experiments. He died peacefully in 1790, at age 84. 20,000 people attended his funeral. His epitaph, written years earlier, compared his body to a worn-out book, its contents revised and corrected by the author in another edition. Franklin would have approved of such quiet wit. One natasadam the immortality of a simple idea. In the centuries since Franklin's death, his rod has remained one of the most recognizable symbols of science. It represents logic over fear, simplicity over complexity, courage over superstition, humility over arrogance, humanity over helplessness. It stands atop nearly every tall building in the world. It guards homes, schools, ships, factories, temples, observatories, airports, rockets, and laboratories. It is as universal as the chimney or the doorframe. And unlike many technologies, it has never become obsolete. Lightning rods placed on barns in the 1700s still work today. Rods designed in the 1800s still protect historic towers. Rods installed in the 1900s still guard skyscrapers. The lightning rod is one of the few inventions that achieved technological immortality. Conclusion: the spark that changed the world. The lightning rod is more than a piece of metal. It is the embodiment of a profound truth. Knowledge can protect. Understanding can liberate. Curiosity can save lives. Franklin once wrote, half in jest, "I shall make the thunder harmless." He did far more than that. He shifted humanity from fear to inquiry. He transformed storms from omens to objects of study. He built a bridge between the earth and the sky. He gave people power over danger, without arrogance, without exploitation. The lightning rod stands today as a monument, not only to scientific achievement, but to the capacity of a single human mind, armed only with reason and courage, to reshape the world. And perhaps that is the greatest legacy of all. A reminder that science begins with a spark, and that spark can illuminate generations.